So last night was a major election night, the last multi-state election night of the 2018 primary season. Obviously, all of this is leading up to the general election on November 6th. In terms of progressives, let's just look at the Justice Democrats for now. There were 4 Justice Democrats on the ballot in Florida, 3 in Arizona, including an incumbent. In Arizona, there was Mary Mattiella in the second, Deidre Abboud was running for Senate, and Raul Grijalva, he's an incumbent, great progressive, in Arizona's third. In Florida, there was Charter Richardson in the 7th, Sanjay Patel in the 8th, Pam Keith in the 18th district, and Michael A. Hepburn in the 27th. All of them lost, except the 2 who were running unopposed, Grijalva, an incumbent, and Patel in Florida. So it sounds like a terrible night for progressives, right? Well, as Cenk would say, hold. We had a major victory for the progressive movement, a victory so massive that while these other losses were upsetting, it makes last night a good night for the progressive movement in the country. A massive upset that lazy establishment media pundits can't just chalk up to demographics like they did with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because this is Florida, the swingiest of swing states, and a Bernie Sanders endorsed progressive, Andrew Gillum, has won the Democratic nomination for governor in a stunning upset. Wow. Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum pulled off a shocking upset in Florida's Democratic primary for governor Tuesday night, defeating the establishment favorite, Gwen Graham, by a narrow margin of about 40,000 votes. Throughout the campaign season, Gillum trailed in the polls behind Graham, a former congressional representative, and Philip Levine, the former mayor of Miami Beach. The Tallahassee mayor saw a surge after a late-stage endorsement from Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, who traveled to Florida to stump for Gillum earlier this month. As of Monday, Gillum was polling in the number 2 spot. Huge upset. And what's his platform, you ask? Because it's phenomenal. Medicare for all. Legalizing marijuana, massive corporate tax increases, a $15 minimum wage, repealing Stand Your Ground, bail reform. He wants to put $1 billion into public education and more and more. And coming into today, he was trailing from anywhere to 6-ish, 7-ish points in polling by my last check, to some polls, like the Real Clear Politics average, showing him in 4th place, to Gwen Graham, the more incrementalist Democrat who is the daughter of former Senator Bob Graham. And he also had another centrist challenger, as was mentioned, the millionaire Philip Levine, or Levin, who knows. Anyway, who cares anymore? He called himself a radical centrist. Well, not radical enough, buddy, because despite the big money that they had, they lost. And let's be fair here, Gillum had big donations too. It doesn't mean that his policy positions aren't fantastic and sincere and that he isn't a great progressive, but Gillum was backed by George Soros and Tom Steyer, 2 big Democratic donors. So we have to be fair here and mention that, just letting you guys know. However, the upset was still a true upset, money and all. Gillum was thoroughly outspent in what was an incredibly expensive election. He closed out the campaign with a $4.1 million war chest compared to Graham's $7.8 million and Levine's $31.7 million, according to campaign finance reports. Graham, a centrist, had the backing of the Democratic establishment. Emily's List, which helps elect pro-choice women, infused $1.8 million into her campaign. She had pledged to expand Medicaid and to decriminalize the personal possession of marijuana. So I've got to stop here and point something out. Gillum ran on legalizing marijuana. Graham ran on decriminalizing personal possession. And Gillum ran on Medicare for all. Graham ran on expanding Medicaid. What do you know? Your weak tea ideas and big money didn't stand a chance against an engaged progressive base that were excited to vote in a primary. And they weren't excited by your bland, weak ideas. They voted for the guy whose ideas a majority of Americans favor, by the way, legalizing marijuana and Medicare for all, not the watered-down policies that Graham was advocating to appease donors. On what planet did her strategists think that that would excite anyone in a Democratic primary with Democratic liberal voters? A money planet, I guess? And those primary voters were engaged. The state witnessed a major increase in voter turnout. More than 1.4 million total ballots were cast in the Democratic primary for governor, as compared to 837,796 votes 4 years ago. turn out, because they were excited to vote, and they were excited to vote for a candidate that represents their ideals as progressive voters. Early reports seem to indicate that there were many more millennials engaged this time around, but I'm not sure of those numbers yet. It sure seems that way. So yes, that was a massive victory. And now we have Ben Jealous in Maryland, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, in New York, James Thompson in Kansas, Andrew Gillum in Florida, progressives winning all over the country. So cut it out with this demographics BS. It's not that complicated. It's the ideas. And it couldn't be more obvious because these candidates are being outspent, but they're still winning. They're not going to win every time, and as of right now, they're not going to win even a majority of the time. I mean, there were many losses of Justice Democrats like Deidre Abboud in Arizona or Pam Keith in Florida, who were frankly crushed by their Democratic establishment candidates or opponents. I mean, the DCCC backed Pam Keith's opponent, and the big money machines that include Emily's List, frankly. But this was a massive victory. So in November, Gillum will be up against Republican Ron DeSantis, the Donald Trump endorsed candidate for governor of Florida. There's so much at stake here. Florida is notoriously a swing state, and having a Republican in office could mean a lot of things, but especially gerrymandering and redistricting, so that that state could become more electorally red, even on the presidential level. So having Gillum in office would ensure that that didn't happen, that kind of gerrymandering. But unlike Gillum, who eked out his victory, Ron DeSantis pretty much crushed his more centrist Republican opponents, because the Republican Party and their voters have become the party of Trump. And even in Arizona, while the more establishment candidates did win, especially in the Senate race, it was still all about Trump. In Arizona, Republican primary voters chose the establishment favorite, Representative Martha McSally, to replace Mr. Trump's most outspoken GOP critic in the Senate, Jeff Flake, in a contest that evolved into a test of which candidate could embrace Mr. Trump more snugly. I love that word, snugly. The Republican Senate primary was basically a three-horse race between Martha McSally, the Trump-pardoned criminal Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and former Arizona State Senator Kelly Ward. Both Ward and Arpaio, of course, were insane Trump Republicans who essentially split that vote, with the more establishment Republican winning. But still, McSally wants a border wall, was enthusiastic about the tax cuts for the rich that Trump implemented, and embraced Trumpism in her campaign. So while this is a semi-win for the establishment right, I wouldn't get too excited for human decency, and the establishment Republicans shouldn't get too excited either. These candidates are only winning if they embrace Trump. So there are fewer and fewer John Kasichs winning their primaries. But unfortunately, because Deidre Abboud lost her primary handily to Kyrsten Sinema, the more establishment candidate, Sinema, who wants to improve Obamacare over single payer, will be facing McSally in the general. I'm not so sure about her chances, to be honest, when you run that kind of campaign. So there was also good news, though, in Arizona in the governor's race, where under the radar, the more progressive candidate, David Garcia, won his primary, and he will face Doug Ducey in the general election, who is the incumbent. Garcia is running primarily on education, which is his background. He ran for superintendent a while back, I think 2014, and he has a lot of progressive proposals on that front, so this should be really interesting. And there is actually some good news coming out of Oklahoma, of all places, too. Republicans picked businessman Kevin Stitt as their nominee for Oklahoma governor over former Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett, 55% to 45%. That qualified as good news for Democrats, since early polls showed their nominee, Drew Edmondson, narrowly leading Stitt but tied at best with Cornett. Outgoing Governor Mary Fallin is terribly unpopular, which has given Democrats a real shot in this otherwise very red state. So, look guys, we're not going to win every battle, especially early on, because we are at an inherent disadvantage money-wise. That's just the reality. But now People are seeing that this can be done. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez outspent 10-1 wins in her district on these ideas without corporate PAC money. Andrew Gillum wins on these ideas, outspent massively in a state that is not known as incredibly progressive. He won with Democratic voters statewide, and increased turnout a lot. And what Democrats never understand is that people are drawn to winners and to strength. And once people see that these progressives are winning on strong ideals and strong policy positions and a strong stance on money in politics, in most cases, against that donor money, they will become inspired and more engaged. This is a snowball effect, and we're just at the top of the hill right now. So huge victory with Andrew Gillum. I am excited for November 6th, and we will keep you updated here on Rebel Headquarters.